This right here is the RTX 4080 Super. It is pretty much a refreshed RTX 4080 that should be a bit faster, but then quite a bit cheaper than the original non-Super one. It is launching with an MSRP of $1,000, while the original 4080 had a price tag of $1,200 when it launched about a year ago. So that is a big $200 difference between the two cards. And as usual, we spent the last couple of days testing this card in 40 different games on 3 different resolutions. So let's see how it performs. Let's see how it compares to the RTX 4080 non-Super, as well as its main competitor, the RX 7900 XTX. And let's talk about if and when it makes sense to buy one of these. Let's begin. The card I tested for this video is the new 4080 Super Founders Edition. It uses the same cooler design as before, but now it is completely black, which looks very good in my opinion, but it also makes it more sensitive to dust and fingerprints. Since it has the same design and largely the same chip underneath, the feature set is similar to the previous Founders Edition, so you don't get dual BIOS, you don't get RGB lighting, just a very nice, very solid and very heavy cooler design. It still uses the 12-volt high-power connector and comes with 3 display ports and 1 HDMI 2.1 port in the back, and unfortunately, still no DisplayPort 2.1. Looking at the specs, the 4080 Super's main upgrade is a small 5% increase in cores and a small increase in core and memory clock speeds. It still comes with 16GB of VRAM and the TDP is still at 320 watts. But as usual, I'm going to talk about the actual power consumption and power cost a bit later in this video. So it is only a small technical change, but the new price is actually the most interesting thing about this card. Now, the original 4080 was a very good GPU, but it was extremely expensive for basically a second best experience. And now with this new price, the 4080 Super is a much stronger competitor for the RX 7900 XTX from AMD. It is a way more realistic upgrade for anyone that was considering an RTX 4070 Ti, and it no longer sits too close to the 4090 to make it a reasonable option. Now, since these super cards use the same architecture and same production process, there aren't any major feature changes to talk about. Now, Nvidia's focus still remains very much so on ray tracing, DLSS, and frame generation, and then making sure that it is present in more and more games. So, as I said at the start, in this video, I'm mostly going to focus on how the RTX 4080 Super compares to its predecessor, the RTX 4080 non-Super, as well as its main competitor, the RX 7900 XTX from AMD. The 7900 XTX was also a $1,000 card when it launched, but it is currently selling for just under that in the US and for about 1,000 euros here in the Netherlands. So it is just a bit cheaper than what the 4080 Super should cost. And I will mostly focus on 1440p and 4K results to begin with, but I will talk about the 1080p results a bit later in this video as well. Now, let's start with one of the best games of 2023 and my personal favorite, Baldur's Gate 3. The 4080 Super just outperformed the old 4080 by a couple of frames, but it's not that much of a difference. It is as fast as the 7900 XTX on 1440p, and it is just ahead on 4K resolution on average, but looks much better when we look at 1% lows. In Starfield, which is an AMD-sponsored title, the 4080 Super was faster than the old 4080 by a couple of frames, but the XTX was still a few frames ahead on 1440p and 4K resolution, which is actually not that bad considering how poorly Starfield ran on Nvidia cards when it launched. Remnant II is interesting because it has closer integrations with Nvidia, including both DLSS upscaling and frame generation features. But if we look at native rendering, the XTX performs considerably better, with one of the bigger gaps between the XTX and the 4080 Super. Still, the 4080 Super easily runs the game on 4K native, if you want to go that way, and with DLSS on, it runs at around 110 FPS on the quality setting, which arguably looks better than native anyway. Again, only an insignificant difference between the Super and the non-Super 4080. Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora is actually an AMD-sponsored title, yet that one seems to run better on Nvidia cards. Both on 1440p and native 4K resolution, the 4080 Super had a pretty big margin over the RX 7900 XTX. Alan Wake 2 is a fantastic game and another one that is really heavy on the GPU. And here, there was only a frame or two between the 4080 Super and the original 4080 non-Super. Compared to the AMD, the XTX card was a bit faster on 1440p, while at 4K they basically performed the same, ending around 60 FPS native. So both cards require upscaling to keep the 1% lows over 60 as well. In Microsoft Flight Simulator, it is a very similar story. We ran into a CPU bottleneck on 1440p, which for AMD GPU seems to be just a bit higher generally, but at 4K resolution, they were performing within a frame of each other. Spider-Man Remastered is a game that favors Nvidia a little bit more, and here we see that the 4080 Super just outperformed the 7900 XTX on 1440p and on 4K with a very small difference over the RTX 4080. And if you're really into Palworld, this is a game that seems to be really heavily favoring Nvidia at the moment, and here the 4080 Super outperformed the 7900 XTX by a big margin on both 1440p and on 4K resolution. That being said, the game just launched, so we should probably expect some performance improvements either way, but it is an Unreal Engine 5 title, so it's not like it's something that is brand new. Anyway, to make this video considerably shorter, I'm not going to talk about 40 different games individually, so let's check out some summaries, starting with 1080p. Now, you really shouldn't buy a $1,000 card for 1080p gaming, but if you really want to, this is what you can expect. This card will run every game easily, and you can expect some very high frame rates for high refresh monitors in those fast shooters like Counter-Strike 2 or Rainbow Six Siege that are way beyond what most monitors can display anyways. On 1440p, the 4080 Super is still kind of an overkill for most games and most monitors. Practically every single title ran at over 100 FPS without any upscaling, with the only exception being Flight Simulator, which is CPU bottlenecked. And while that game doesn't really need more FPS, you can use frame generation if you prefer higher numbers. And on 4K resolution, we got 60 FPS or more in every single game of the 40 games we've tested. It is a little bit close to 60 in some titles, but all of those games do support DLSS, and then with upscaling enabled, you will typically go above 100 FPS again. Now, you can use frame generation in some titles, but it kind of depends on the game, whether that makes sense or not. And for a slow-paced game like Flight Simulator, it totally makes sense, but if you're playing something like Formula 1, for example, that's a bit more latency sensitive, I would personally just stick to DLSS upscaling only without frame generation enabled. Now, with ray tracing enabled in some games that support it, of course with DLSS enabled, we got to 90 FPS or more on 4K resolution, so if you're into ray tracing at either 4K or 1440p, this card will do more than fine. And for those of you that are interested in the complete RTX showcase experience with full path tracing, the 4080 Super manages to do that really well. On 1440p, Cyberpunk 2077 and Alan Wake 2 ran at more than 120 FPS with all the bells and whistles enabled. So with ray tracing, with ray reconstruction, with DLSS upscaling, and with frame generation. And on 4K resolution, Alan Wake ran at 84 FPS average, while Cyberpunk 2077 ran at 69 FPS average, but then with 1% lows just under 60. Still, I would say it offers a good experience, and this is one thing that you cannot do with its AMD competitor. If I compare it to the old 4080 non-Super, there's really not much of a difference between the two, and on average, the 4080 Super is only just a bit faster, and it doesn't matter much which resolution you look at. Now, that is a little bit disappointing when you see the 4070 Super actually giving us a noticeable performance upgrade over the old 4070, but the 4080 Super doesn't increase the power target and it reduces the price, so that kind of evens out in my opinion. The 4080 is going end of life, and if you see a good discount on those cards, you're not gonna miss that super suffix that much. Compared to the RX 7900 XTX, it does vary a bit depending on what game you look at, as always. And if we look at this comparison on 1440p, there's several games that really favor either Nvidia or AMD. But on average, in all those games, they're actually extremely close to each other. On 4K resolution, it's pretty much the same story. Both cards have some games that benefit one card or the other, but on average, the difference is really, really small. But if we're talking about the 4K experience, I think the RTX 4080 Super is actually a better 4K card than these percentages suggest, because if you're gaming on 4K, you should be using upscaling by default, and DLSS is simply way ahead of FSR. So if you're at 1080p or even 1440p, upscaling doesn't matter as much with these high-end cards. But on a fast 4K monitor, for that extra performance and lower latency, upscaling is always worth going for, and that gives Nvidia a bit more of an edge than it had when you just look at native performance. Don't get me wrong, I think AMD has improved their FSR and frame generation significantly in the last couple of years, but they also kind of started late, and it just feels like they're constantly playing catch up with Nvidia when it comes to all these features, and it will take them a bit longer to catch up to where DLSS is today, while Nvidia is also continuing to improve. Anyways, compared to the RTX 4070 Ti Super, Nvidia's latest $800 card, the 4080 Super is 14% faster on 1440p and 18% faster on 4K resolution. With the 4080 Super costing 25% more than the 4070 Ti Super, I guess it makes the Ti Super not sound that bad, but I still don't think that card makes any sense to buy. So if you're already ready to spend $800 on a card, it is definitely worth adding another $200 to get almost 20% more performance. Or if we look at the total cost of a brand new gaming PC, which is about $1,500 to $2,500, upgrading to the 4080 Super will get you a significantly faster PC. And if you really want to save up, get the 4070 Super without the Ti. That makes way more sense in my opinion, but I'm going to talk about that a bit more in my next video. Anyway, a big thing to consider with any GPU is its power consumption, and the 4080 Super does really well here. It has a 320 watt TDP, but it actually very rarely goes over 300 watts. On 4K resolution and GPU-bound testing, I measured 284 watts on average. Now that's about the same as the 4080 non-super, while the RX 7900 XTX sits closer to 350 watts. And of course, less power means less heat to deal with and also lower energy costs. Now, I get that most people that buy a $1,000 GPU probably don't have to stress about its higher power cost, but depending on your use and where you live, it can definitely make a real difference. So if you're gaming 2 hours a day and you're paying 10 cents per kilowatt hour, for example, it really doesn't matter at all. But if you spend a lot more time gaming and you're paying 40 cents per kilowatt hour, like in some parts of Europe and like we do here in the Netherlands, it actually starts to add up really quickly, and what seemed like a cheaper card when you bought it can end up costing you more than the alternative. And I do think that everyone should consider their own use case and cost of power before making a decision. So the RTX 4080 Super is not the most exciting new product. It is basically a marginally faster RTX 4080 with a super sticker and a $1,000 price tag that actually should have been the 4080 price to begin with. But at the end of the day, with this new price, this card actually makes sense. Now, assuming you're going for 4K gaming or 1440p with some extra headroom for future, I think this card is so much more interesting than the RTX 4070 Ti Super, and I think it's also more interesting than the RX 7900 XTX for all the reasons I mentioned earlier. So they're very close in terms of raw performance, but the value of DLSS at 4K resolution and better efficiency are enough for me to justify the new price gap of about $100 or euros. Now, AMD is known to react with their prices when the competition gets a bit closer, so I do expect them to drop the price even further, which might make the 7900 XTX more interesting yet again. Still, if you want the best performance possible, the RTX 4090 remains the only option because it is still much faster than any other card, and the Super upgrade doesn't really do much to close that gap. But 4090s are selling for $2,000 or more at the moment, so the RTX 4080 Super definitely feels like the reasonable sub-top alternative it was always meant to be. Now that's all I had for today, but before I go, let's talk about the sponsor of this video. This video was brought to you by Seasonic and their Vertex power supplies. These fully modular power supplies are extremely efficient and very quiet due to their fan design and their hybrid fan mode that stops the fans completely under 40% load. They come with a variety of connections for any kind of system you have in mind, including the 12-volt high-power cable for the latest Nvidia graphics cards. And to wrap it all up, they now offer a nice and cozy 12-year-long warranty. Check them out using the links in the description below. Thank you all for watching. I hope this video was useful enough. If you liked it and you want to see more content like this one, please do check back in a day or two for my RTX 4070 Super and Ti Super reviews that were delayed because of CS, as well as my reviews of a lot of different third-party models that I'm working on at the moment. So please do consider clicking that subscribe button so you never miss my future uploads, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!